Time by Caracris is 6 p.m. and this is CBX Business News. The business news headlines are brought to you by QMax Wealth Management, making more possible. Green jobs in focus. A Caribbean Exim Bank gains support and India defies trade pressures. Good evening and welcome to CBX Business News for Monday, June 8, 2026. I'm Rashel Moncrieffe. Thanks for joining us. Coming up, the United Nations Development Program says Jamaica's green economy could create up to 8,000 jobs and boost GDP as the country pursues a more climate-resilient future. Also ahead, momentum is building behind a proposal for a Caribbean export-import bank with growing support emerging in the Bahamas. And later, India maintains a current account surplus despite a wider trade gap and continued global economic uncertainty. Stay with us as we unpack these stories and more right after the break.
I'm trading stocks to achieve my financial goals.
I'm also trading stocks to achieve my financial goals.
Start a conversation with the Jamaica Stock Exchange.
Check jamstockx.com for information and a list of registered stockbrokers. You can also call the Jamaica Stock Exchange at 876-967-3271 for information on how to begin. I am achieving my financial goals.
I'm achieving my financial goals.
The local news is brought to you by Derrimon Trading, better from the start. The Development Bank of Jamaica, facilitating economic growth and development. Caribbean Flavors and Fragrances, tease the senses, and Pulse Investments. To CBX Business News. We begin with a new economic projection suggesting climate resilience could become a major growth driver in Jamaica. Jamaica could generate thousands of new jobs and accelerate economic growth by expanding investment in climate resilience and environmental protection initiatives. Speaking at a National Environment and Planning Agency distinguished lecture on Thursday, Chairman of the Natural Resources Conservation Authority, Christopher Winstone, highlighted findings from a United Nations Development Program-supported analysis showing that a transition to a greener and more climate-resilient economy could create thousands of jobs.
This agenda is also economically sound, and recent UNDP-supported analysis found that a stronger shift towards a green and climate-resilient economy could generate up to 8,000 new jobs in Jamaica, nearly 1% additional GDP growth relative to business-as-usual path. And this matters. It tells us that environmental stewardship and economic opportunity are not opposing goals. Properly designed, they reinforce each other.
That was Chairman of the Natural Resources Conservation Authority, Christopher Winstone. At the same time, environmental and disaster management agencies are calling for new investment mechanisms to support Jamaica's long-term climate recovery efforts. Speaking at the same event, Executive Director of the National Solid Waste Management Authority, Audley Gordon, urged policymakers and stakeholders to establish dedicated green recovery funds for community-based projects.
And we want to establish dedicated green recovery funds and incentives for community-led restoration projects. I know NEPA is a cash-rich company, so I don't think they need that advice, but, you know, if we can go into the communities, train people at the local level, and of course, you know, once you go there, the first word when come out of the mouth is, what's in it for me, the incentive, how much may I get, you know? But if this is an investment that I believe would be well made.
That was Executive Director of the National Solid Waste Management Authority, Audley Gordon. The reopening of the Troy Bridge is expected to improve the movement of agricultural produce, workers and tourists between Trelawney and Manchester, ending 5 years of disruption for communities and businesses that depend on the corridor. The bridge, which collapsed during Tropical Storm Grace in 2021, had forced farmers to take longer routes to market, increased transportation costs, and created challenges for commuters and business operators. Speaking during the recent launch, Member of Parliament for North West Manchester, Michael Phillips, notes the closure affected economic activity on both sides of the parish border.
We had teachers who teach at Troy, who live over on the Manchester side, who had to relocate, leaving their residence over on that side, renting houses on this side. So there was displacement on both sides. I was in the area a few weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago, seeing persons, market vendors, crossing the bridge now, heading towards Santa Cruz, heading to Westmoreland. So it is a connection not only for farmers, for students, but also for tourists.
That was Member of Parliament for North West Manchester, Michael Phillips. Meanwhile, Minister with Responsibility for Works, Robert Morgan, says the new structure restores an important transportation corridor while providing greater resilience against future weather events.
And this is, to me, not simply the opening of a bridge. It's the restoration of a vital connection. It is the return of an easier movement for families, farmers, students, workers, taxi operators, business operators, emergency services, and all those who depend on this corridor on a daily basis.
That was Jamaica's Minister with Responsibility for Works, Robert Morgan. Jamaica's merchandise trade activity weakened during the first 2 months of 2026 as both imports and exports recorded significant declines compared with the corresponding period last year. Data released by the Statistical Institute of Jamaica shows total export earnings fell 28.8% to $217.7 million between January and February, down from $305.8 million a year earlier. The decline was largely attributed to a 59.1% reduction in earnings from crude materials, excluding fuels. At the same time, the country's import bill contracted by 8.1% to $1.21 billion. Lower spending on raw materials and intermediate goods, consumer goods and fuels, and lubricants contributed to the decline. Statin says Jamaica's main import partners during the period were the United States, China, Brazil, Japan, and Trinidad and Tobago, while the leading export destinations were the United States, Russia, Trinidad and Tobago, the Netherlands, and Canada. Exports to Jamaica's top markets totaled $164.2 million, representing a 19.1% decline when compared with the same period last year. And in financial news, Jamaica Stock Exchange listed Productive Business Solutions, PBS, reported a sharp decline in profit for 2025 despite recording higher operating earnings and improved gross profit margins. Revenue slipped to $374.9 million from $387.4 million in 2024. However, gross profit increased by more than 11% to $127.4 million, reflecting stronger margins across the group's operations. The technology and business solutions provider generated operating profit of $31.3 million, slightly above the $30.5 million recorded a year earlier. But higher tax charges and impairment losses weighed on the company's bottom line. As a result, net income fell to $4.4 million, down from $7.6 million in 2024, representing a decline of approximately 41%. Earnings per share declined to 1.38 US cents from 3.31 US cents in 2024. Meanwhile, the company ended the year with total assets of $422.4 million and shareholders' equity of $77.1 million, while borrowings increased to nearly $166.2 million. PBS also paid dividends totaling $11.2 million during the year. We move to the latest updates from the JSE equities. In Monday's trading session, the JSE market activity resulted in the trading of 112 stocks, of which 50 advanced, 34 declined, and 28 traded firm. Leading the winners are the Limnas and Bards, ISP Finance Services, Elite Diagnostic, and Consolidated Bakeries Jamaica, while leading the losers are JMMB Group 10% variable rate JMD preference shares, JMMB Group 7.15% cumulative redeemable preference share, GUS Corporation ordinary shares, and Salada Foods Jamaica. The main index advanced by 2,430.47 points to close at 338,580.40 points. The junior market index advanced by 16.51 points to close at 3,026.38 points. It's time for the Market Education feature, brought to you by CARICRIS, Regional Ratings, Global Standards. In today's Market Education feature, we're defining the term holding company. A holding company is a parent corporation that owns controlling interests in other businesses. Rather than producing goods or providing services directly, its main role is to own and oversee subsidiary companies, often through a majority stake in their voting shares. This structure allows the holding company to maintain strategic control while leaving the day-to-day management of operations to its subsidiaries. A well-known example is Alphabet Incorporated, which owns Google and several other technology businesses. That was the Market Education feature, brought to you by CARICRIS, Regional Ratings, Global Standards. And that's it for the local news segment. Please stay with us. The regional news is up next. The local news is brought to you by Derrimon Trading, better from the start. The Development Bank of Jamaica, facilitating economic growth and development. Caribbean Flavors and Fragrances, Tease the Senses, and Pulse Investments.
If it were not for the Jamaica Stock Exchange listing, Phosphate Company Limited would not be where it's at today. I called them, they listened to my concerns and my fears, and they gave me the answers. All the fears I had about banks, about losing control, you are having them. And I tell you, they were dissipated when I spoke to the Jamaica Stock Exchange. This is one of the best decisions I have ever made in business. If you want to change the trajectory of your business and to grow, make that call today to the Jamaica Stock Exchange. You will be glad you did.
Welcome back. And now for the regional business news. A push from the African Export-Import Bank, Afreximbank, to establish a Caribbean Export-Import Bank is gaining momentum as regional leaders look for new ways to finance trade, investment, and economic growth. Prime Minister of the Bahamas, Philip Davis, is throwing his support behind the proposal, arguing that Caribbean countries need their own financial institutions to mobilize capital and reduce dependence on external sources of funding. Addressing the Caribbean Development Bank's 56th annual meeting in Nassau, Davis pointed to Africa's experience with the African Export-Import Bank as a model for the region. He noted that Afreximbank has already committed billions of dollars to the Caribbean and says a homegrown institution could help unlock new sources of capital and expand trade opportunities.
Now, this year, Afreximbank raised its commitment to our region from $3 billion to $5 billion. More than $750 million has already reached our region. A pipeline of more than $2 billion is still to follow. They are building a trade center in Bridgetown, and they have turned their attention to something that should get the attention of everyone in this room: the creation of a Caribbean Export-Import Bank, a Caribbean Exim Bank, an institution that could finally be our own. We should be clear about what this means. It was not charity passing down from north to south. It was solidarity rising from south to south. It was one part of the global majority saying to another, "We have built our own house. Now we will help you build yours."
Davis says small island states must work together to mobilize capital and reduce their reliance on financial systems that often fail to account for their unique development challenges.
We must pool the strength we already have. No single Caribbean economy can finance its future alone. Together, we are a market the world has every reason to take seriously. It is no longer enough to be a region the world is willing to invest in. We must become a region willing to invest in itself. We must no longer accept that a credit rating built for a continent that should decide the fate of an archipelago. We must create tools of our own, regional guarantees, blended finance, mechanisms that reward our resilience instead of punishing our geography. We should be measured by the future we are willing to finance, not by the distance, not by the disasters we are forced to survive.
That was the Bahamas Prime Minister Philip Davis. Meanwhile, Caribbean governments are being urged to build new engines of growth as high debt levels, climate risks, and global uncertainty continue to threaten the region's economic outlook. Speaking at the Caribbean Development Bank's 56th annual meeting, Bahamas Finance Minister Michael Halkatis says Caribbean countries must shift from responding to crises to building more competitive and resilient economies. He identified renewable energy, food security, climate-resilient infrastructure, and the blue economy as key areas for future expansion.
Today, however, resilience alone is no longer enough. The future demands strategy, the future demands transformation, the future demands bold leadership and collective action. The question before us is not whether uncertainty exists. It does. The real question is whether we will allow uncertainty to define us or whether we will define the future ourselves.
Halketis says regional economies remain highly exposed to external shocks and must diversify into new industries to create jobs and improve long-term economic stability.
Economic diversification is therefore no longer a luxury. It is a necessity. We must strengthen agriculture and food production. We must support small and medium-sized companies. We must deepen regional trade. We must invest in manufacturing, logistics, renewable energy, financial services, and the creative economy.
That was the Bahamas Finance Minister Michael Halketis. In other news, cutting fuel imports may soon become one of the biggest economic shifts in St. Kitts and Nevis. The Twin Island Federation has launched a national roadmap to guide its transition